It's a little bit offensive how these kids just can't wait to get out of here. You know what I'm saying? You know, I'm not that bad, you know. There's always something that distracts me. It never fails. There's just always something weird and distracting that happens to me. I think it's just the devil's way of trying to mess with me before I preach. This morning, you know, of course, if you can, I don't know how well you can see it, but pieces of my face are falling off. You know, I'm continually peeling, so that's the thing that is bothering me the most. But then also my top button here popped off in Sunday school class this morning. It's probably a good thing that it happened there, or not. Eric might lose an eye this morning. You know, may have flown off during. There's always something, you know. You know, in studying and continuing through the study of the book of Matthew, I love, because I'm kind of a big picture guy myself. I love the conciseness of Matthew until Matthew gets to these last hours in the life of Christ. And Matthew leaves out all the detail. He just crams the story in as tight and succinct as he can, giving us only the details that he deems important. Well, I happen to deem all the details important. So as we continue to look at this, we have to bring in these other texts. If we don't, then we have no idea, without bringing in these other texts, even some of the things that Matthew's talking about, or why the things happen in the way that they do. So let's go through this together this morning. If there's one major theme that you're going to see throughout all of the text this morning, it would be no fault. You're going to see that said over and over and repeated over and over and over as we continue through the text. Like I said, it's going to be Matthew 27 and Mark 15 and Luke 23 and John 18. You put all those together and we have a very good picture of these last trials of Jesus. We're going to see all three of Jesus' Roman trials today. I kept the words as I have, Matthew in the black, Mark in the red, Luke in the green, and John in the blue. So you'll have an idea when you see those texts on the screen where the text is coming from. Our first point last week, which is going to be our first point this week, I called it the last Jewish mock trial. But this week we'll rename it, if you like to fill in the blanks, Intro to Pilate. Intro to Pilate, or you can put the whole word there, Introduction to Pilate. Who is this guy? And we had these verses in our class last week, and these are the only two that repeat. Now when morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people conferred together against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate the governor. Now we know that they met sometime between midnight and 3 a.m. With Jesus in the illegal trial. Had the illegal vote in the illegal courtroom, which wasn't even a courtroom, meeting in the house of the high priest. So they meet in the morning early, probably around 5 a.m.-ish, in order to make this vote, this illegal vote that they made, official, so they could justify it. This vote that they had to kill Jesus for blasphemy, and that was their reason that they came to. But of course, they're not able to do that because per Roman law, which they lived under, which was the ultimate law, they were not allowed to execute anyone. So they bind Jesus and they lead him away and deliver him to Pilate the governor. Now, what is significant about this guy? Now, if you do a lot of research on Pilate, you can actually find a lot of things out there. There are actually whole biographies written about Pontius Pilate. The trouble with those biographies is that they have zero sources. And what do you call a biography written about someone that has zero sources? You call it a work of fiction. So there are all these fictitious biographies written 1,000 years after Pilate lived and died, with all these made-up details about what people think his life was. What we actually know about Pilate is very little, but we do know a little bit. We know, for instance, that the governor assigned to this area of Israel and Palestine typically was governor for no more than 1 to 3 years. Pilate, on the other hand, is somehow governor for 10 years. So he had some level of success in keeping the order. And that was his highest call as the governor of Judea and the whole area, was to keep the order. Well, when he first came, there were some serious mistakes that he made. One was, as most Romans did in those days, they carried these giant flags on poles, these giant standards, and at the top of the flag they would have the eagle, which was the symbol of the Roman Empire, and above the eagle there would be a round circle, a big metal crest above the eagle with the face of whichever Caesar was in power at that time. Well, when he first came to Israel and he was bringing those flags on those standards, the people just went crazy over that. Why? Because they said, "You're not bringing idols into our country." Now, it was funny about which religious rules they thought were important to follow and which ones weren't, but they saw that as an idol. So they said, "You can't do that." He said, "Well, I'm in charge, you're not." So he kept them. The people protested. He gathers all the protesters up, brings them into a coliseum, surrounds them with a cohort of Roman soldiers, has all the Roman soldiers draw their swords, and says to the mob of people that are protesting the standards, "Stop protesting or you're all dead." And famously, written in the Jewish history, they extended their necks and said, "Do it. Cut our heads off." They called his bluff. He executed none of them. They won. Okay? So sometime later, I don't know if he had a short memory or what he was thinking, but he forgot or just decided that he was going to do what he wanted anyway. Sometime down the road, he had these golden shields made to honor Tiberius Caesar, and on the shields they had an image of Tiberius on the shields. Well, this time the people protest again. "Those are idols. What didn't you understand the first time? You're not bringing idols with you. We understand that you're in charge, and we're not going to fight you on that, but you're not going to bring idols or we're going to protest." So instead of protesting, though, this time, they write to Tiberius Caesar directly. Tiberius reprimands Pilate. He tells him, "Get rid of the shields. What are you thinking? I didn't send you there to start another war. We had to fight this war to win the thing, to win this area. You're not going to ruin that." So he gets reprimanded, and he gets rid of the shields. All this, why am I telling you all this? All this is important because it helps to understand the psychology of this guy, Pontius Pilate, because it helps us understand why he took the actions that he took. He did not want to get in trouble from Rome and lose his position of power. Now, he had two places that he stayed. His main palace was on where anyone in their right mind in Israel would have had their palace, on the Mediterranean Sea in the city built by Herod the Great called Caesarea. It was a beautiful resort city, and it was mainly Romans that lived there. So there, where he had his palace. But he also stayed in the palace that was attached to the temple. This was called Fort Antonius. Herod the Great also had this built so that there could be a fort attached to the temple, so that if the temple and Israel was ever attacked, there would be a fortified defense position there. But since it wasn't a time of war, it wasn't being used as a fort. It was being used as a presidential type palace, a governor's palace, governor's mansion. So that's where he stayed when he was in Jerusalem. He's in Jerusalem because of the Passover feast, to keep order. So they lead him to Pilate. Our next point, clean hands, filthy hearts. They bound him and led him away, delivered him to Pilate the governor, into the praetorium. That's going to be there at Fort Antonius. It's like the living room, okay? Courtroom type area. And it was early. Like I said, it was around 5 a.m. This is before just as the sun is coming up. And they themselves did not enter into the praetorium so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. You see what's going on, what's truly at the heart of what's wrong with these guys. They have no qualms about having an innocent man murdered. But don't let us touch something that a Gentile has touched or enter into the residence of a Gentile, because then we wouldn't be able to eat of the Passover lamb. We won't get to celebrate Passover. We will be defiled. When they were already more defiled than they ever could have possibly been for treating the true Passover lamb in the manner that they were treating him. But they don't see that. So they lead him. They lead Jesus there. Well, they can't go in. Then there's the undignified question. The undignified question. Therefore, Pilate went out to them. He had to. So they had to send someone in. Get him. We can't go in. Bring him out. I assume that they went and woke him up. And here he comes out. What accusation do you bring against this man? They answered and said, and get this, church, if this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you. This would be the equivalent of you being arrested, drugged before a judge. The judge says, what are the charges? If he wasn't guilty, he wouldn't be in the courtroom. Just give the sentence. Now, Pilate's no fool. So he basically says, what? Okay. You want to wake me up for some nonsense like this? Here's his... he creates some panic, and he creates some lies with his response. So Pilate said to them, take him yourselves. Judge him according to your law. This is dripping with sarcasm. You don't really have much power to do much of anything. If you're not going to tell me why you're even here, then get out of here. You do it. Why'd you even come here? The Jews said to him, we are not permitted to put anyone to death, which would have really probably taken him aback. Wait a minute. You bring me this guy? You want me to kill this guy? And you won't even tell me the reason why? If you think that sounds weird, it's because it's weird. Nothing like this ever happened. Ever. It says that they did this, verse 32. This is all we have to always remember. That's part of God's plan. This happened actually to fulfill the word of Jesus, which he spoke, signifying but by what kind of death he was about to die. Now, when it says by what kind of death, what he means is a Roman death. Jews didn't crucify people. That was a uniquely Roman execution. Jesus had said that's the way that he was going to die, so that's the way he was going to die. But no, the Jews, if they would have had the ability to have killed him themselves, they would have stoned him to death. But that's not the death that he was supposed to die. And they began to accuse him, saying, now here comes the lies. They know they have to tell Pilate something, or Pilate's just going to run them off. So here's what they come up with. We found this man misleading our nation. Now they believed that. They believe that he was misleading the nation. They don't believe that he's the Christ. They don't believe that he's the Son of God. They have all the proof and all the evidence and all the teaching right there before them, but they're denying that. So they believe this first part. We found him misleading our nation. And, here's a lie, forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar. He didn't forbid anyone to pay taxes to Caesar. That's one of the tricks they tried to do. They said, Jesus, or should we pay our taxes to Caesar? Their answer was no. We don't need to pay taxes to Caesar. Caesar, we only owe tribute to God, not to Caesar. That's when Jesus turned that question on him and said, whose face is on that coin? Oh, it's Caesar's face on the coin. If it's his face, give it back to him. Jesus didn't say, don't pay your taxes to Caesar. He said, give all of your money to Caesar. What? Yeah, pay your taxes. So there's the second accusation he brings before him. But you could see how Pilate would have heard this. Here comes a revolution. What is his chief job above all things? Don't let a revolution break out. Actually, and we'll talk about this next week, there had just been a rebellion breakout that had been squashed by Rome. And we'll talk about that later. He doesn't want another one. His job is to keep the peace. And, last accusation, and he's saying that he himself is Christ. And it's almost like they say, now that word would have been Savior. He's telling everyone that he's a Savior. Then he thought, wait a minute, he's not going to care about that. Then they very quickly add, a king. A king. Not just a Savior. He's saying that he's our Savior, that he's our King. Okay, so there's a red flag. So not paying taxes, red flag number one. That's how rebellions were started because of that very reason. Second red flag. Who's king? Caesar. No one else is allowed to be king. This guy is starting a rebellion. So Pilate has his information. Okay, these are charges, legitimate charges. Now we have the first Roman trial. The very first Roman trial begins. Therefore, Pilate entered again into the praetorium. He leaves the crowd outside. So here's all. They want to see what's going on, but he's not going to let them see. He doesn't want them in there. So he enters it back inside of Fort Antonius and summons Jesus to come in with him. So they leave the crowd back behind. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." Yes. He wasn't expecting that. Another thing that he wasn't expecting. So, he's looking at Jesus. He's standing there all beat up, covered in blood, covered in spit, hands tied behind his back. Looks pretty rough. Doesn't look like a king. I like to look at every time I do any of these studies, I look at all of the art that has been created, surrounding these environments. And I like this one the most because it must have just been a perplexing thing for Pilate to have sat and gazed upon Jesus and wondered, what am I getting into here? What are these people trying to do? Why me? That's truly what he's thinking. Why me? I don't want to deal with this. Our next point. This is all illegal. Now, Jesus knew what he could say that would prevent his death, and he knew what he could say that would still ultimately lead to his death. He's very choosy in his words. What I find fascinating is that even though this has to happen, and even though it has to happen in a very specific way, Jesus still will not let these proceedings go on without making it very obvious to the people that are doing these things that it's all illegal. So that's what comes next. Look what Jesus says. Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" So it's very clever what Jesus is doing here. Jesus is saying, because Jesus understands Roman law just as well as he does Jewish law, just as he does everything, Jesus says, wait a minute. Why are you asking me questions? You're a judge. You're not a prosecutor. Jesus is basically saying, where are the prosecutors? Where's the district attorney at? There is no one here accusing me. Where are the witnesses who are saying these things about me? Where are your witnesses? You can't be a witness. You're the judge. Jesus understands that even by Roman law, these proceedings are illegal. So Jesus puts him on the spot. And Pilate says, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priest delivered you to me. What have you done? Another illegal question. He's not allowed to interrogate Jesus. He's not a prosecutor. He's a judge. You know, the judge doesn't come down from the stand and start interrogating people during a trial. The judge listens to the evidence. That's what his job was to be like the supreme law of the land. But the judge, Jesus lets it be known as well, which is also strange to me because he doesn't have to say anything, doesn't have to do anything. But Jesus lets it be known to Pilate that he is a threat to no one, which I can't even really get my head wrapped around all this entirely. Jesus says to Pilate these words, courtesy of John, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. And it's interesting that word realm that's put in the word. The most literal translation would just be here or this place. Like, yeah, I'm a king, but my kingdom isn't in this. I'm the king of a different planet. I'm the king of a different place. What does Jesus sound like to Pilate now? A cuckoo bird, right? He's like, they brought me a crazy person. He's saying I'm a king, but I'm not a king of here. If I were a king of here, people would be fighting, which is true. What leader of any rebellion is arrested by the authorities and there are not wild protests or fighting in the streets? It has never happened, not in history. But Jesus is saying, listen, do you hear protesters? No? Do you hear about anybody fighting to save me from this predicament that I'm in? No? They're saying I'm the leader of a rebellion. Where's the rebellion? You should be able to see it, right? But that's not what's going on. He says, as it is, my kingdom isn't of here. Yeah, I'm a king, but not of this place. Next point would be grasping at straws. Grasping at straws. The origin of this saying, grasping at straws, we know what it means. We know that it means to try to find, to try to grab a hold of something that will support you when you have nothing to support you. This saying is actually an ancient saying, referring to the full saying is a drowning man will grasp at straws. And if you're drowning, you can't swim, but there's some reeds on the riverbank you can grab a hold of. Even though they won't support you, when you're drowning, you'll grab anything that you can. That's what Pilate is doing. He's grabbing at anything that he can. Therefore, Pilate said to him, he's looking for an accusation that's going to stick, that's going to work, because he's just trying to keep the most amount of people happy. So you are a king. Jesus, did you not hear what I just said? Yes, I'm a king, but I'm not leading a rebellion, and I'm not a king of here. But Pilate's trying to, just like the Jews, he's trying to get something. Like, Jesus thinking there's got to be some reason why they want him dead. He's got to be a bad guy. He's got to be. So he's just trying to get Jesus to reveal something to him that he can't see. Then we have the glass verdict. And I call it a glass verdict because Pilate gives a verdict. He makes a judgment call. That's his job. So that's what he does. It's a glass verdict because it's very fragile. As we're going to see, it's not a verdict that's going to be able to maintain its shape. It's going to be shattered. Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth." Now, Jesus is being very deliberate here as well. Well, first, people just don't talk like this. People don't say, "This is why I've come into the world." That's a weird way to talk about yourself. I never say to anyone, "Well, the reason that I came into the world was for this reason," right? Jesus is talking almost like he's an unearthly being who entered into a different world. Well, that's exactly what he is. He's just being as straightforward as possible, but also understanding that Pilate's going to interpret this all as gibberish. But then he says something that he knows is going to basically make Pilate just roll his eyes. Romans didn't really believe in many things that were absolute. They didn't believe that there was a definitive truth that governed the world. If there's any, they would have fit in perfect today, wouldn't they? We're a very Roman-esque society that we live in, because people say the same things. But if there was one thing that the Romans believed in, they believed in the sun. Why did they believe in the sun? That seems like a weird thing. Well, they worshiped the sun. There was nothing more important to Romans than the actual sun. Why? Well, because it was predictable. It was dependable. It came up every morning. It went down every evening. And it came every morning, every evening. And it was the source, as far as they could tell, it was the source of life of all things. Second to the sun was probably salt. Salt was equally as important. These are weird people. They are. People aren't so much different today. But Jesus says, "I come to testify to the truth." Now here Pilate would have rolled his eyes. Oh, the truth. Here he's going to tell me about the truth. And then Jesus continues, "Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth? You can't tell me that there's a truth. There is no definitive truth." And when he had said this, basically he's made up his mind. This guy's crazy. They brought me a crazy guy. And he went out again to the Jews. He said to them, "I find no guilt in him." At least he could see that, right? He wasn't completely blind. He didn't know what Jesus was. He didn't know what Jesus was up to. He didn't understand him at all. But one thing he knew very well, he's not guilty of anything, especially these things that he's being accused of. He doesn't deserve death. Next, we see Pilate standing amazed. He's about to see the glory of Christ on full display. The chief priest, though, there's the sentence. That should have ended the whole thing right then, right? But the chief priest began to accuse Jesus harshly. It was a continual accusation. They just wouldn't stop, and they're getting angry, and they're very upset. And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But it's all illegal. These aren't legal proceedings." And Jesus did not answer him with regard to even a single charge. So the governor was quite amazed. To say that he was quite amazed, he was dumbstruck. He feared Christ. First he thought he was crazy, but then he saw him standing before this mob of men who anyone in their right mind would have been terrified of, and there stands the regal, fearless Christ. And to see that is to see power, to see confidence. To see that is to look upon the face of God, the one who has no reason to fear anyone under any circumstance. complete mastery and control of himself. Next, we have the second glass verdict. I don't know why he would declare a second verdict. I guess he felt that he had to. Then Pilate said to the chief priest and the crowds, I find no guilt in this man. Says it again. But they kept on insisting, saying, so here's some more. He stirs up the people. You know, if you let him go, you're going to regret it because he's going to stir everyone up. He teaches all over Judea, starting from Galilee, even as far as this place. Now, Pilate perks up now. Wait a minute. Who said that? Say that again. Who just said that? Say it again. What did you say? And someone says, he stirs up the people. No. Keep going. What was the rest of that? Teaching all over Judea. Yeah. Keep starting from Galilee. Oh, Galilee. I'm not the governor of Galilee. We have someone in charge of Galilee. This isn't my case. Yes, I don't have to make the call. Get him out of here. You know, this isn't this is Wichita police arresting someone in Wellington. You're out of your jurisdiction. Take him back to where he came from. Not here. Can't do it here. Pilate sees an escape route. He sees his way out where he doesn't have to deal with Jesus. When Pilate heard it, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. Wait, he's from Galilee? And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was in Jerusalem at that time. Now, why was Herod in Jerusalem? Well, he was just there for the celebration, for the party. Herod isn't Jewish either. Herod is an Idumean. But he's there just because he's a guy who just wants to be wherever the action is. He's there. Send him over to Herod. Probably wasn't very far away. Next, we have the second Roman trial. Now, Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus, for he had wanted to see him for a long time. Now, remember, Jesus deliberately stayed as far away from Herod as he could, because Herod killed John the Baptist. And Jesus basically said, I'm not going to Herod. If he didn't listen to John, if he killed John, who Jesus said was the greatest human being who ever lived, the greatest man born of woman, is how Jesus referred to John. If he killed John, I'm not talking to him. He doesn't get a word out of me. If he wouldn't listen to John, what's the point? So why is Herod glad? Why? Because he's been trying to see Jesus for years now. He hasn't been able to do it. Jesus has avoided him. He wanted to see him for a long time because he had been hearing about him and was hoping to see some sign performed by him. That's all he wanted. He wanted the magic act. He wanted to see a miracle. He wanted to see some disease cured, or some crippled person able to walk, or some blind person able to see. He wanted to see the miracles. He'd heard about them. He never saw them. He wanted to see him for himself. And he questioned Jesus at some length, but Jesus answered him nothing. Jesus would not dignify any single thing that Herod said with a response. No response. Church, learn a little bit from this part of Jesus' character. Just because someone demands an answer of you does not mean that you always have to provide an answer. You don't always have to satisfy every person who comes to you and demands that you tell them whatever they want you to tell them, especially when those people are hostile and you know that whatever you say isn't going to do any good anyway. No one has a right to your words. Jesus taught us that. So Herod gives his verdict. In spite of Jesus not saying a word, Herod is still going to weigh in and give his verdict. And the chief priests and the scribes, they're standing there the whole time. Now, they'll come in where Herod is, close enough by. Herod must have been in a place where they could get up close. They follow him across town. They're still accusing him, going on and on. And Herod with his soldiers, after threatening Jesus with contempt and mocking him, Jesus won't dance for him. He won't perform. So what does Herod do? He makes fun of him. Probably has the soldiers slap him around a little bit, push him around. Hey, you're supposed to be some tough guy. You're supposed to be some miracle worker. You're supposed to be some great leader. Do something. Say something. Jesus won't do it. Keeps his silence. So what do? They take one of Herod's coats, one of Herod's cloaks, and when it says here, it calls it a gorgeous robe. They dressed him in a gorgeous robe. Now, that word for gorgeous is literally the word shiny. Is most likely or bright. So is most likely a bright white robe. And a lot of these robes, especially the ones that royalty wore, would have gold interweaved even through them. It's probably one of his old ones. He had a big collection. This is one he was probably going to get rid of anyway. So he takes one of these fine robes. He puts it on Jesus. See the irony here. Jesus is dressed like the king that he is for just a moment here. So he puts this on him and sends him back to Pilate. Well, it seems like is he passing the buck? No, he's not passing the buck. He's saying, I agree. He's basically just letting Pilate know, I agree with you. You were right. And we see the common ground here. And this is interesting, and I dug into this a lot, but I couldn't really find a whole lot to understand this fully. Because it says, now Herod and Pilate became friends with one another that very day, for before they had been enemies with each other. Now, I don't really understand because we're not really given much information of why they were enemies with each other. But we know the one thing that brought them together with some common ground. And that was that they agreed that Jesus had done nothing wrong. That's it. That's it and that's all. And maybe it was just that they agreed with each other, that they said, okay. Or Herod said, okay, if he said there's nothing wrong, I agree there's nothing wrong. Pilate heard the same thing going both ways. People, we typically like people that think the same way we do. That's the only common ground that I can see. Last point, the final verdict, and I put a question mark, because we're going to see a final verdict, but is it the final verdict? Pilate summoned the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to them, you brought this man to me as one who incites the people to rebellion. And behold, having examined him before you, I have found, here we see it once again, no guilt in this man regarding the charges which you make against him. No, nor has Herod, for he sent him back to us. And behold, nothing deserving death has been done by Jesus. Nothing. So there's a first Roman trial, then Herod, a second Roman trial, back to Pilate, a third Roman trial. And what have all of the unanimous verdicts been in all three of the Roman trials? Not guilty. So we all celebrate, right? Jesus is found not guilty on three separate accounts. He's won. The victory has been won. Good has won the day, but good has not won the day. You have to come back next week to find out what happens as we continue looking at how could with three not guilty verdicts, how are we within an hour of Jesus being nailed to a cross? How does something like that happen? You know, in some lessons, I like to give a lot of, in some lessons, I like to give a lot of application. These lessons are not lessons where we look for a lot of personal application. These lessons are designed so that we look at the amazing person of who Jesus was. Stand amazed at Christ. See him for who he is. The one application that I would give you is this. He was brought before Pilate. He was brought before Herod. Brought back before Pilate. Now he is brought before you. Who do you say that he is? Have you ever publicly said who he is? Have you ever publicly put him on in baptism as a great pronouncement, declaration of your faith to the world and to this congregation, who you believe that Christ is? If you have not proclaimed him, proclaim him today. If there's any way we can serve you, please come as we stand and as we sing.